Lucas Turner was born on March 2, 2005, in Springfield, Missouri, under circumstances that would shape the rest of his troubled life. His mother, Evelyn Turner, was only 24 at the time and married to a man named Richard Turner, a local mechanic who had been her high school sweetheart. Evelyn worked as a receptionist at a small insurance agency while Richard provided for the household. Outwardly, their lives seemed stable, but underneath the surface, Evelyn was living a secret life. She had been involved in an affair with a traveling salesman named Daniel Cooper, who frequently passed through town on business trips. That affair led to an unplanned pregnancy, Lucas. When Evelyn discovered she was pregnant, she was consumed by panic and shame. She knew the child could not possibly be Richard's. The timelines didn't match, and she feared that if the truth came out, her marriage would be destroyed and her reputation within their small, conservative community would be ruined. 4 months, she hid her pregnancy as best as she could, wearing loose clothing and avoiding social gatherings. By the time she gave birth to Lucas at Mercy Hospital in Springfield, her marriage was already on the brink. Richard had begun to suspect something, noticing the emotional distance and secrecy that had developed in their household. 2 days after Lucas's birth, Evelyn made a decision that would alter the course of both their lives forever. On March 4, 2005, she signed the paperwork to place Lucas in the custody of the state, declaring him as a safe surrender infant. She left the hospital without him, telling Richard that the baby had not survived birth due to complications. Richard, heartbroken, believed her, and they quietly mourned what he thought was their child. Evelyn buried the truth alongside her guilt and moved on, determined to erase that chapter of her life. Lucas, meanwhile, entered the Missouri foster care system as an unnamed infant. He was assigned the temporary name Baby Boy Doe, until he was officially given the surname Turner, matching his birth certificate. His childhood was anything but stable. Over the years, he was moved from one foster home to another, each placement promising stability but delivering disappointment. Some foster families were indifferent, treating him more like a financial obligation than a child. Others were cruel, inflicting emotional or physical abuse that left lasting scars. Lucas grew up with no sense of belonging, no consistent parental love, and no clear understanding of why he had been abandoned. By the time Lucas turned 12, he had already lived in 9 different homes across Missouri. School became a place of isolation rather than refuge. He struggled academically, often acting out in class and getting suspended for fights. Counselors described him as withdrawn, angry, and distrustful. He rarely spoke about his feelings, but when he did, he often questioned why his real parents didn't want him. The system labeled him as difficult, making it even harder for him to be placed in a permanent home. As the years passed, that question, "Why did they throw me away?" grew into a festering wound that shaped his view of the world. When Lucas turned 18 in March 2023, he aged out of the foster care system and was left to navigate adulthood on his own. He had no family, no safety net, and no emotional support. He rented a small, rundown room in a boarding house on the outskirts of Kansas City, living off part-time jobs at fast food restaurants and grocery stores. But inside, the same question haunted him louder than ever. That was when he decided to dig for the truth. He requested his sealed adoption records from the state, which were released to him under Missouri law once he became an adult. Inside that folder, he found the name he had long wondered about, Evelyn Turner. Discovering that name set something off inside Lucas. He learned through online searches that Evelyn was still alive and now owned a successful boutique clothing store in Springfield. She lived in a 2-story suburban home with a white picket fence, a golden retriever, and a spotless image in the local community. She had no other children and appeared to live alone, having divorced Richard years ago. Seeing pictures of her smiling at charity events made Lucas's blood boil. She had discarded him like trash, yet here she was, thriving. The realization hardened into a burning resentment that he could not let go of. From that moment, his life gained a singular purpose: to confront the woman who had given him life and then thrown him away. In late September 2023, 6 months after aging out of the foster care system, 19-year-old Lucas Turner packed everything he owned into a torn black duffel bag and boarded a Greyhound bus heading south to Springfield, Missouri. The trip took 5 hours, but to him, it felt like he was traveling back through time, into the very place where his life had been broken before it even began. His body was still, but his mind churned. He wasn't sure what he wanted from Evelyn yet: an apology, recognition, or simply a chance to see the face of the woman who had abandoned him. But he knew he couldn't continue drifting through life without confronting the ghost that had haunted him since childhood. Springfield was different from how he had imagined it. Instead of the crumbling, gray place he had pictured, the city was vibrant, filled with tree-lined streets, busy coffee shops, and neat suburban neighborhoods. It almost angered him to see how clean and peaceful everything looked, as if mocking the chaos of his own life. He rented a small room above a hardware store in a rundown part of town. It had a single bed, a cracked mirror, and a window that barely shut, but it was cheap and private, exactly what he needed. He spent the first few nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, rehearsing what he would say if he ever stood in front of her. Finding Evelyn was easier than he expected. A simple internet search led him to Turner and Company Boutique, a women's clothing store located on Cherry Street, near downtown Springfield. The shop's social media page was filled with photos of Evelyn smiling with customers, attending charity fashion events, and standing proudly in front of her store during its 10th anniversary celebration. She looked nothing like the broken, guilt-ridden woman he had pictured. She appeared elegant, composed, and successful, with blonde hair styled into soft waves and a graceful confidence that radiated from every image. Seeing her like that stung him deeply. She had built an entire life without him, as though he had never existed. For days, Lucas walked past the boutique, observing her from a distance. He memorized her routine. She usually opened the shop around 9 a.m. and stayed until 6 p.m., chatting warmly with customers, arranging clothing displays, and occasionally stepping outside to drink coffee on the sidewalk bench. There was no trace of regret in her expressions, no shadow of the past that he could detect. It infuriated him. Each glimpse of her laughter felt like a slap in the face, a reminder of everything he had been denied: love, safety, family. Eventually, Lucas worked up the courage to step inside the boutique, posing as a customer. He dressed neatly, wearing the only clean button-up shirt he owned, trying to appear older and more composed than he felt. The smell of perfume and polished wood overwhelmed him as he entered. Evelyn was behind the counter, sorting receipts. When she looked up at him, their eyes met for the first time. She smiled politely, the kind of distant smile reserved for strangers. Lucas felt his chest tighten. He introduced himself under a false name, Aaron, and asked if she was hiring part-time help. Evelyn said she wasn't, but offered to keep his name on file. The entire exchange lasted less than 5 minutes, but it left Lucas shaking. She hadn't recognized him, and of course she couldn't. To her, he had never grown past 6 months old. Over the next several weeks, Lucas became a silent fixture around the boutique. He visited often, sometimes buying small items just to interact with her. Gradually, Evelyn began to warm to him. She started greeting him by name, asking how he was doing, and even offering him coffee once. Lucas answered politely but never revealed who he really was. He absorbed every detail about her life, carefully piecing together the image of the woman who had thrown him away. She lived alone now in a beige 2-story house on Sycamore Drive, about 10 minutes from the shop. She drove a silver Lexus. She was known in the neighborhood as friendly and generous, often donating clothes to local shelters. Everyone seemed to admire her. That admiration gnawed at him like acid. Lucas kept a notebook hidden under his mattress where he wrote about his encounters with her. The entries grew darker as the weeks passed. At first, they were filled with questions: why didn't she want me? But slowly they turned into statements: she didn't care if I lived or died. She erased me. He found himself replaying the same thought each night before he fell asleep. If she could look into his eyes and still feel nothing, then she deserved to know what it felt like to lose everything. The idea began as a fleeting impulse, but with each passing day, it grew heavier, more solid, until it felt inevitable. By mid-November 2023, Lucas had quietly woven himself into Evelyn's daily world without her realizing who he truly was. He had become her friendly, familiar stranger. But beneath that calm surface, something inside him was steadily unraveling. The resentment that had lived in him for years was no longer just a shadow in the back of his mind. It was awake now, alive, and it wanted revenge. And for the first time in his life, Lucas felt like he had a purpose. On the chilly night of December 3, 2023, Springfield was wrapped in quietness, with faint Christmas lights glowing from porches along Sycamore Drive. It was a Sunday evening, just past 9 p.m., when Lucas Turner stood across the street from Evelyn's house. The wind cut through his jacket, but he barely felt it. For weeks, he had been spiraling deeper into a mental storm of anger and grief, and that night, the storm finally solidified into action. He told himself he wasn't going there to kill her, at least not yet. He just wanted to see how she lived, to witness with his own eyes the life she chose instead of him. But deep down, some part of him knew that something irreversible might happen. Evelyn's house looked peaceful and warm, its soft yellow light glowing through the curtains. From where he stood in the shadows, Lucas could see her sitting on the couch, a book open on her lap, a mug of tea steaming on the coffee table. A golden retriever slept at her feet. The sight filled him with a strange mixture of longing and fury. He had never been held, read to, or comforted like that. He imagined what it would have been like to grow up there, to be tucked into bed upstairs, to have birthday parties in the backyard, to be loved. That fantasy collided violently with the reality of his childhood, spent in cold, temporary rooms, listening to other children cry through thin walls. Lucas had been preparing for this night without fully admitting it to himself. In the weeks before, he had quietly gathered information about the house. He had followed her home from the boutique several times, timing how long she stayed out in the evenings and when she typically turned off her lights. He knew she locked her front door but often left the back sliding door unlatched when she took her dog out late at night. He had even visited a pawn shop on West Chestnut Expressway to buy a cheap folding knife, which now sat heavy in his pocket. He told himself it was only for protection. But the truth was, he wanted to feel powerful for once in his life. He wanted to hold something that gave him control. At 9:17 p.m., Evelyn got up from the couch and walked toward the kitchen. Lucas crossed the street silently, sticking to the shadows, and crept around to the back of the house. His hands trembled as he tried the sliding door. It slid open with barely a sound. The warm air from inside hit his face like a wave. He stepped in slowly, his heart pounding so loud he thought it might give him away. The house smelled of cinnamon and laundry detergent. The dog lifted its head but didn't bark, only wagged its tail once before laying it back down. Lucas held his breath, moving deeper into the living room. Evelyn returned from the kitchen carrying her mug, humming softly. She froze when she saw him. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. She looked more confused than afraid at first, as if trying to place him. Lucas stood in the center of the room, hood pulled low, fists clenched at his sides. His throat felt like it was closing. "Who are you?" Evelyn asked, her voice sharp now, alert. Lucas didn't answer. He couldn't. The words tangled inside him. He took a step closer. Evelyn set the mug down slowly, her eyes narrowing. "You need to leave," she said firmly. "I'm calling the police." She reached for her phone on the coffee table. Something inside Lucas snapped. He lunged forward, knocking the phone out of her hand. It clattered across the hardwood floor. Evelyn gasped and stumbled back. "Don't you touch me," she shouted, fear flashing across her face now. Lucas's breathing turned ragged. He pulled the knife from his pocket, the metal glinting under the warm lamplight. Evelyn's eyes widened as she saw it. She raised her hands slowly as though trying to calm a wild animal. "Listen to me," she said carefully, her voice trembling. "You don't have to do this. Just leave. Whatever you want, just..." "Why?" Lucas's voice cracked as the word tore out of him. It was the first thing he had said all night. Evelyn blinked, startled. "Why what? Why did you throw me away?" he shouted, the words exploding out of him, echoing through the quiet house. Evelyn's mouth opened, but no sound came. Confusion crossed her face, then shock as realization began to creep in. She studied his features, the sharp jaw, the shape of his eyes, and something in her expression faltered. "No," she whispered, almost to herself. "It can't be." "It is," Lucas said, his voice shaking with rage. "I'm the baby you didn't want. The one you left behind." Evelyn staggered back, her hand covering her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes. "Lucas," she whispered, as if saying the name could undo everything. "You don't get to say my name," he snarled. His hands trembled violently, the knife catching the light with every twitch. "You don't get to act like you care now." Evelyn choked on her words. "I was young. I made a mistake. I thought you'd have a better life without me." "A better life?" Lucas laughed bitterly, the sound sharp and broken. "I grew up in hell. You gave me to strangers who hurt me. You never even checked if I was alive." "I didn't know how," she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. I was scared. Lucas's eyes burned. I was scared every day, he said. But no one came for me. For a heartbeat, the room was silent except for their breathing. Evelyn took a small step toward him, hands still raised. Please, she whispered. Put the knife down. We can talk about this. We can. No, Lucas said softly, almost to himself. You don't get to fix this. Before Evelyn could react, he surged forward. What followed was chaos. Blurred, fast, violent. The knife plunged again and again. Evelyn screamed once, a raw sound that ripped through the house, then fell silent. The mug of tea tipped over on the carpet. The golden retriever whined and backed into the corner, trembling. Lucas didn't stop until his arm felt numb, until her body went limp beneath him. When he finally stepped back, gasping for air, his hands were slick with blood. Evelyn lay still, her eyes open and glassy, staring at nothing. Lucas dropped the knife. The house was deathly quiet now. His breath came in short, panicked bursts. He stumbled toward the door, leaving bloody footprints on the hardwood floor, and slipped out into the cold December night. At 9:46 p.m., he disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind the woman who had given him life, and the wreckage of what he had just done. On the morning of December 4, 2023, the quiet neighborhood of Sycamore Drive in Springfield, Missouri, woke up to flashing red and blue lights that broke the peaceful winter dawn. At 7:12 a.m., Evelyn Turner's next-door neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Margaret Collins, called 911 after noticing that Evelyn's front door stood slightly ajar and her dog was barking frantically inside. Margaret had gone over to check because Evelyn, known for her punctual morning routine, hadn't picked up her newspaper or let her dog out. When officers from the Springfield Police Department arrived minutes later, they found the scene that would quickly become one of the city's most shocking homicide cases in recent years. Officer Daniel Ruiz was the first to step inside. He later told reporters that the smell of iron hit him immediately. The living room was a swirl of violence frozen in place. Blood pooled on the hardwood floor around Evelyn's lifeless body, her skin pale and lips blue from the cold air seeping in through the open door. The overturned mug lay shattered in the corner, and the retriever cowered under a table, trembling but unharmed. Evelyn's eyes were still open, glassy, staring up at the ceiling. There were multiple stab wounds to her chest and abdomen, and her hands showed deep defensive cuts, evidence that she had fought desperately in her final moments. Detectives from the Major Crimes Unit quickly took over the scene. By 8 a.m., yellow crime scene tape wrapped around the property as crime scene technicians in white suits photographed every detail and collected evidence. They found a trail of bloody shoe prints leading from the living room to the back sliding door, which had been left slightly ajar. No signs of forced entry were present, suggesting the killer had either known how to get inside or had followed Evelyn's routine closely. The kitchen counter still held her purse and car keys untouched. A preliminary sweep confirmed nothing appeared stolen. This pointed to a personal motive rather than a burglary gone wrong. Crime scene investigators collected several crucial pieces of evidence. The bloody folding knife left near Evelyn's hand, a broken cell phone on the floor near the couch, and smudged fingerprints on the sliding glass door handle. They also retrieved footage from 2 exterior security cameras from nearby homes. One video, captured from across the street at 9:43 p.m. the night before, showed a tall figure in dark clothing sprinting away from Evelyn's house. The person appeared to be young and moved with urgency, but the image was too grainy to make out facial features. The body was transported to the Greene County Medical Examiner's office around 10 a.m. for autopsy. Dr. Melissa Chong, the county medical examiner, confirmed later that Evelyn had suffered at least 11 stab wounds. The cause of death was blood loss and trauma to vital organs. Based on the dried blood and body temperature, she estimated the time of death to be between 9:30 and 10 p.m. on December 3rd. There were no signs of sexual assault or robbery. Everything about the killing seemed deliberate, precise, and fueled by rage. Meanwhile, detectives began their interviews with neighbors and associates. Most described Evelyn as kind, reserved, and generous. She had no known enemies or romantic partners. Several neighbors recalled seeing her boutique employee, described as a young man with dark hair who had been visiting the shop regularly, though none knew his name. One neighbor also mentioned noticing a man standing across the street from Evelyn's house on multiple evenings in recent weeks, often just watching the property from the shadows. That detail caught the detectives' attention immediately. At the boutique, detectives interviewed Evelyn's two part-time employees. They confirmed that a young man named Aaron had been visiting the store frequently for the past 2 months. He sometimes bought small items and had asked about job openings. One employee remembered that Evelyn had recently started greeting him by name and had seemed to like talking to him. However, they had no other information about him. No last name, no phone number, and no record of him ever being officially hired. Detective Carla Simmons, the lead investigator, quickly began combing through the shop's security footage from the past several weeks. She found numerous clips of the same young man. Medium build, dark brown hair, about 5 feet 10 inches, always alone, always watching Evelyn with an intensity that seemed unsettling in hindsight. Still, they didn't know who he was. To identify him, they pulled surveillance footage from the pawn shop 2 miles away after noticing that the knife used in the murder matched a model commonly sold there. The pawn shop's December sales log showed that a folding knife had been purchased in cash by a young man on November 15th, and the surveillance video confirmed it was the same person seen at the boutique. The footage was clear enough to capture his face. By the afternoon of December 5th, investigators distributed still images from that video to local agencies and foster youth services in the area, suspecting he might be transient or recently aged out of the system based on his appearance and lack of known background. That same evening, a social worker from the Missouri Department of Social Services recognized the man. His name was Lucas Turner. She had worked with him until he aged out of the foster care system earlier that year. He had a history of behavioral issues, depression, and multiple placements. Most importantly, she revealed a detail that stunned the detectives. Lucas was Evelyn Turner's biological son, abandoned by her as an infant in 2005. The revelation changed everything about the case. What had first looked like a random break-in now seemed rooted in a deeply personal history. Investigators now saw the crime not as a burglary or thrill killing, but as a calculated act of vengeance by a son against the mother who had discarded him. Detectives immediately requested a warrant for Lucas's arrest and began tracing his whereabouts through bus ticket purchases, known shelters, and surveillance from businesses near Cherry Street. But Lucas was already gone. Somewhere out there, the son who had been erased from Evelyn's life had returned to erase her, and now he had vanished into the wind. As investigators delved deeper into Dylan Parker's past, they began to realize that his motive was far more complicated than they had initially thought. What had seemed like a straightforward act of revenge gradually unfolded into a complex web of abandonment, longing, and psychological breakdown. Detectives found a collection of old letters hidden inside a shoebox under Dylan's bed. These were letters he had written to a mother he had never known, starting from when he was around 9 years old. Each letter expressed a desperate hope that she would one day come looking for him, telling him that leaving him at the orphanage was a mistake, that she truly loved him. None of the letters had ever been sent. Some were neatly written, while others were crumpled and tear-stained. But the most shocking discovery came from social media archives. Investigators uncovered that Dylan had secretly followed his mother's life for nearly 3 years before the murder. He had created fake accounts to watch her Facebook and Instagram posts. He saw photos of her new house, her friends, her pets, and even the birthday parties she threw for her other children from a later marriage. This discovery revealed a disturbing truth. Dylan had watched from a distance as his mother built the life she had denied him. Each happy photo seemed to deepen his resentment. It was as if he had been silently collecting proof that she had been capable of love and care all along, just not for him. Detectives also found notes that looked like a plan. Rough sketches of her house, the schedule of when she left for work, and reminders to bring a weapon. It became clear that Dylan had planned the killing weeks in advance. However, another shocking detail emerged from his internet history. For several months before the murder, Dylan had searched for how to reconnect with your birth mother and how to forgive someone who abandoned you. This suggested he might have considered a different path at one point. A former co-worker of Dylan later told investigators that he had spoken once about finding someone and hoping she'll want me. This led detectives to a haunting conclusion. Dylan may have originally planned to meet his mother, not kill her. But something must have gone terribly wrong when they finally met face to face. This revelation changed the tone of the case entirely. The public had seen Dylan as a cold-blooded killer who murdered his mother out of pure hatred. But now it appeared that Dylan's act might have come from a devastating emotional collapse, a moment where years of rejection and isolation exploded into irreversible violence. The twist reframed the case. It was not just about murder, but about a son who once longed for love and belonging, and when he realized he would never have them, destroyed the person he believed had stolen them from him. Dylan Parker's trial became a nationwide spectacle, drawing intense media coverage and public fascination. The courtroom in Cedar Falls, Iowa, was packed every single day. Journalists, legal analysts, and curious locals filled the benches, eager to witness what was described as one of the most haunting family murder cases the state had ever seen. The prosecution built a powerful and methodical case. They portrayed Dylan as a calculated and vengeful killer who meticulously planned his mother's murder. Prosecutors presented the jury with the disturbing evidence: his internet searches about how to kill someone quietly, his written notes about her house layout, and his emotional journal entries expressing hatred toward her. They emphasized that this was not a crime of passion, but a deliberate act carried out with cold intent. In contrast, the defense took a more psychological approach. They didn't deny that Dylan had killed his mother. Instead, they argued that he had been severely traumatized by years of abandonment, neglect, and emotional deprivation. A forensic psychologist testified that Dylan suffered from severe depression and post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, conditions that impaired his ability to regulate his emotions or make rational decisions. The defense painted him as a broken young man whose mind had collapsed under the weight of years of silent suffering. Throughout the trial, Dylan sat almost motionless, his face expressionless. He spoke very little, only nodding occasionally when his attorney addressed him. At one point, the jury was shown photos of Dylan as a small child in the orphanage, lonely, withdrawn, and seemingly invisible to the world around him. The haunting images left many in the courtroom visibly shaken. After weeks of testimony and emotional arguments, the jury finally reached a unanimous verdict. On December 12, 2019, Dylan Parker was found guilty of first-degree murder. However, the judge took his mental health into consideration when delivering the sentence. Dylan was given life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years, under the condition that he receive ongoing psychiatric treatment in a secure mental health facility within the prison system. The verdict sparked mixed reactions. Some members of the public felt that the sentence was too lenient for such a brutal and premeditated act. Others believed it was fair, considering the lifelong trauma Dylan had endured and the psychological damage it had caused. For the town of Cedar Falls, the trial's end brought no sense of victory or relief, only a quiet, lingering sadness. What had once seemed like a simple murder case had unfolded into a story of generational pain, unresolved wounds, and the tragic cost of a love that never came. After the verdict was delivered, the small town of Cedar Falls, Iowa, sank into a quiet, reflective gloom. Dylan Parker's name became synonymous with tragedy, a cautionary tale about how the scars of childhood abandonment can grow into something dark and uncontainable if left untreated. Local news outlets continued covering the case for weeks, examining every detail of Dylan's upbringing, his mental health struggles, and the haunting question that echoed through the community: could this have been prevented if someone had truly seen him earlier? The orphanage where Dylan spent his early years issued a formal statement expressing deep regret for failing to provide enough emotional support to children in their care. Some former caretakers even spoke publicly, saying they remembered Dylan as a withdrawn, angry boy, and now carried guilt for not realizing how serious his pain had been. In response to the public outcry, Iowa state officials announced new funding for mental health programs aimed at orphaned and fostered children. Several schools, including Dylan's former high school, added on-site trauma counselors to support students dealing with emotional neglect or abandonment. The case had forced a long-overdue conversation about mental health care for society's most vulnerable youth. Meanwhile, Dylan began serving his life sentence in a high-security correctional facility with a specialized mental health unit. He rarely spoke to other inmates and spent much of his time in therapy sessions. In a brief interview with a journalist months after his sentencing, Dylan said only one haunting sentence: "I never felt like I belonged to anyone, and when I finally found her, it was already too broken." That single line was printed in newspapers across the country, a chilling epitaph to a lifetime of isolation. The murder of Emily Parker by her own son remains one of the most unsettling family tragedies in Iowa's history, a grim reminder that neglected pain does not disappear, it only waits. Dylan's story stands as both a warning and a sorrowful plea, that love, if given late, may come too late to save someone who has lived too long without it.